Good morning. Happy Sunday. This is your host, Zade Eldomiaty, and we're back with another episode of the Wise Lemon Podcast. It is an overcast day here, but the energy is still high. I did want to start the episode first and foremost by saying, acknowledging a delay of uploading on YouTube. I know I posted it last Sunday via Spotify. Been working through some technical difficulties on the back end. I appreciate you guys bearing with me. Gonna either do a double episode drop or stretch it out and have a little bit of a break between, but we will see. And that episode will be released, so don't you worry if you've been keeping an eye out for 7. It is on the way. But today, wanted to talk about a few things. Been reading some things that were interesting, been hearing some things that were interesting, been thinking about some things that I think were interesting, and wanted to share it with the group as a whole. And there's lots that I wanted to discuss, but at the top of the episode, one thing that I did want to consider, just think about is time. Obviously, very big topic, right? It dictates our lives. Our lives are affected by the flow of time. No father time spares no man is an incredible quote that I always loved. Just the idea of you gotta appreciate where you are in the now. Because if you think about time, generally speaking, you're only ever in the present. You're working off of experience from the past, and the way that you choose to approach the present directly affects your future. And when you're younger, time feels slow. You're a kid and it feels like those summer days lasted like a million years. Things from preschool to first grade feels like it was an eternity. And then as you start to get older, your perception of this time gets quicker and quicker and quicker. Is it the experience of being able to say, I've gone through this many days, weeks, years, etc., and because you've had that experience, your body kind of knows what that's like, so it almost anticipates that? I don't know. But I do know there's a phenomena of people who have talked at length for a while where it's as you get older, time goes faster. Is that fair? I don't know. I'm not the judge of what's fair and what's not fair, but that's seemingly the reality of the situation. And when you think about it, a lot of people... Well, I shouldn't say a lot of people. For me personally, I feel like there's a lot of time that I maybe wish I got back. That the way you ultimately spend your time kind of dictates and defines your life in a way. How, what you think about, how you indulge your time, your hobbies. What do you spend the majority of your time doing? You answer that question, I think it just says a lot about you as an individual, as a person, what you like, what you don't like, what gets you going, what your motivations are, which I think is interesting. And I was reading a book recently that was fantastic, and in this book, Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman, he talks about the conception and the invention of a clock, and almost like the mechanization of time. And the idea that before, and I was reading this, and I really had to put the book down and just think about this because the concept in itself, I found it to be very interesting and almost a little off-putting. But before the conception of the widely adopted clock, people were living moment to moment. There was general morning, afternoon, and night, but we weren't getting, I got to go do this at 1:45, or I got an appointment at 2:30. That wasn't the way the life flowed back then. That just simply wasn't the case. But then humanity, and in the book, one of these things they mention is the medium is the message, and how you choose to say something describes incredibly what it is. The medium is the message. In this particular case, when you're discussing a clock, it changed the way that people viewed their lives. It changed the way that people viewed their day. It broke everything down into hours, minutes, and seconds, when before it was just moment to moment. And it's almost like it superseded the natural flow of time, and we've just kind of put this artificially constructed structure in place that breaks things down and turned us into timekeepers. And this is what he mentioned in the book, from timekeepers to time savers to time servers, where I feel this way all the time, and I feel like I mentioned it on previous episodes, but like I feel like I'm rushing sometimes, and I know I have something at 10 o'clock, and then I have something at 12, and then I got something at 2, and I find myself going from one thing to the next, and it feels, and I didn't think about it until I read the excerpt in the book, but it does feel slightly unnatural to go with the flow of the day and to allow the day to take on what it takes on. And I know for me personally, I've had some incredible experiences in the past, and I always said the best days feel like many in one. When you have a day that feels like, oh, yes, like this morning feels like yesterday, or even like a week ago, because we just did so much in such a short amount of time, and it just made the time feel longer. Time flies when you're having fun. Everybody's heard that before. The perception of time, the flow of time, and what that meant before there was a value assigned to it, before there was numbers and structures put in place to really break it down every moment into measurable sequences. It's really interesting when he brought that up, and I really couldn't shake the idea ever since. And I think that's the beauty, and we've talked about books in the past, but that's the beauty of a good book, is that it allows you to think through ideas with somebody who at times are much smarter than you. Shout out to Neil Postman. I mean, that idea and some of the things that he's been talking about in this book, and I've just started it, but it is genuinely some incredible insights. And the thing that I love about reading as well, and just being curious and seeing what's out there, is you're allowing there to be a mystery in the world. That's why one of the quotes that I've always loved about knowledge is the biggest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance. It's the illusion of knowledge. When you think you have the answers, you cease to ask the questions. And then all of a sudden you become content with whatever somebody tells you, and then you're not really making any headway. You're not innovating. You're not learning anything new. You're just thinking about old theories of the past. But if you know that, and you know that things are constantly changing, and you know exactly what you don't know, and what we don't know is a lot, even though we do have access to the internet and all these incredible tools, the mystery of life, that's what it's all about. That's fun. I mean, if we had it all figured out, it'd be incredibly boring. You think about the oceans, you think about space, you think about countless different topics across a variety of fields, and there's so much here in the United States today in 2026 that we don't know. And it's our job to find out, to figure it out, and to discover, and to understand, and to value that knowledge, and to treat it accordingly, and to prioritize the pursuit. That is what's ultimately the most meaningful, because at the end of the day, the answers, yes, they're important, but it's the process that allowed the answers to be uncovered that really demonstrate the intellectual brightness of a society. You know what I mean? And I think that's one of those things where historically, more recently, ignorance has been kind of celebrated, which I don't necessarily agree with. I don't think that's a good trend for a society at large to follow, but you need to make sure that you got people who are asking the questions, who are challenging things, who are trying to learn more, because that's ultimately what pushes a society forward. And I say people asking these questions. I know there's going to be lots of incredible tools and technologies that are going to be able to aid and abet our pursuits moving forward, but you need individuals asking the right questions. Even I come from a slightly, technical background, and I work within the IT space, generally speaking, and a lot of these software engineers, we'll say, for instance, as an example, historically, they would write their own code. They had to understand this completely different language, whether it's C++, Python, JavaScript, whatever. They had to be able to speak this language, and through this language, they'd be able to create pure creation in digital format, which is a beautiful thing, and I really admire people who operate in that space, because I do think it's incredibly satisfying creative work. But nowadays, individuals don't necessarily need to know the languages anymore. There are tools available out there. I'm sure people have heard vibe coding in the past, where you put in plain English, you described as an incredibly powerful program what you want to achieve and what you're trying to create, and it will create it for you. And there's something about that where you're losing from the old to the new. You are losing fundamental skills. It's clear to see. You are incentivizing a different type of learning, a different type of engagement with these tools. And as a result of that, you're offloading. There's a cognitive offloading from human beings onto the tools and technologies that we're currently using. Is that a good thing in the name of efficiency? Absolutely. I'm sure if you're a stockholder and you're seeing the profitability of implementing such a change, sure. It seems almost obvious why wouldn't we do this. But in the long term, when you sacrifice human capital for technological gain, where that ultimately leaves us is a much, much smaller group with those proficiencies and ultimately a loss of knowledge, which I think is incredibly sad. And the pursuit of knowledge and the retention of knowledge is one of the most important things for any society. When I was younger, I used to want to be a politician. I used to want to help the world through public settings and serving the common good. And it seemed very obvious to me from a very young age, and this is maybe an incredibly overly simplistic view of the government of the United States and of just societies in general and what leads to the most impact. But I always felt you invest in public education and you pay these teachers like they're the starting center for the Chicago Bulls or something like that. Incentivize people to be good teachers, to teach the youth, for that knowledge to spread and to allow the critical thinking to kind of reverberate throughout an entire community. I always felt like, and this may not be a revelation, this may be a very basic thought, but the idea being the best investment you could ever make is in education. That compounds like nothing else when you invest in the youth and you allow them to have the tools and the skills to be able to navigate through this world appropriately. They leave a better world for those behind them. Unfortunately, at least here in the United States, we've seen that is simply not the case, and that our teachers don't get enough appreciation, compensation, or recognition, which kills me and it makes me very sad to say. But recognizing the value and the impact of a good teacher throughout a society, I think, is incredibly crucial, because that really does change the world. They change people, and those people have an effect. So that is just a little bit on that, the idea of time, what it was like before the invention of the clock to now, how that changed our perception of it, and how it ultimately changed the flow of human life. The value of mystery and of being curious and pursuing knowledge. And to that point, the last thing I wanted to talk about, mystery is beautiful and so is history. And I'm a huge history buff, and I know I've mentioned it before, and I know I will mention it again. But the idea that we have it all figured out and that this is the end state. The United States of America, for those who are unaware, is going to be celebrating its 250th anniversary. 250 years of the United States of America being a thing, which is, in the grand scheme of things, if you know history and you look at the run of empires generally speaking, that is a very, very short amount of time. This country is in its infancy. And the thing that I'd like to say, because growing up, there was a lot of people who I knew, and a lot of people who I know now, who are critical about the state of the country, where we are, where we're potentially going, the things we're doing. But the thing you got to understand, or the thing that I like to keep in mind a lot of the times, is a lot of the times when you think it's the end of the world, the United States and just societies in general have been through lots of different things, have been through lots of challenges, and unfortunately lots of the times things have to get bad before they get better. And the beautiful thing, and the thing that I really love about this country, is the promise of the Constitution of our founding fathers, and the idea that they didn't just create this document to cement the rights of the day at their time. They created this document, the Constitution, to extend into the hopes of the future, to allow there to be growth and change within this living and breathing document that will serve mankind, not only at the time in 1776, but for the next 250 and hopefully many, 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 many more years. And when you recognize that they knew their faults, that you have to understand the context of the situation, because history without removed from the context is fiction. You need to know what was happening, where they were at the time, what was the place, what were the ongoing. There's so many things to consider when thinking about history and when looking at history, and a lot of the times people put a moral lens in our current conceptions of right and wrong and apply that to times of the past, and that will never, ever check out the same, because people change, humanity changes, society changes. But the idea that this country was formed in its infancy and it was created with the hopes of a better future, and that they allowed this place to, for all its faults and for all the things that they did wrong in the beginning, there was a framework and a foundation for this place to be by far the most democratic, open, and accepting nation on this planet. And that is why we've thrived for such a long time, and that is genuinely my belief of why we will continue to strive for a very long time. There may be individuals that challenge this growth, challenge this change, but at the end of the day, ultimately speaking, there are a lot of really great people out there in this country who care a lot about family, about their neighbors, about just decency and the common good. And I think overall, more often than not, that wins out. And I know, sometimes the negative voices and the dark voices are the loudest, but that is just the nature of the world. And when you recognize there's a lot of good out there, and it may be quiet, it may be silent, it may be in the background, but it's out there, that's something that should bring everybody tremendous hope. And the hope for a better future doesn't just extend to those founding fathers and the document they wrote and their hopes for the future, but it extends to us at this very day. I mean, they said that this democracy would not work without engaged citizens who understand the democratic process, who understand this country, who understand that if the government doesn't serve them, they have the power to make that change. And I think somewhere along the lines, we kind of forget that. I think we went from active participants into almost observers, and you allow these people who run the government, these senators, these governors, these locally elected officials, to just handle it themselves and to remove yourself from that equation entirely. But that's not the form or the function of this government that we've set up in this country. It requires active participants. It requires people to engage with their communities, to engage with their locally elected representatives, to engage with their representatives of all kinds, and to let their voice be known, because that's the beautiful thing about it. You look at the First Amendment, freedom of religion, assembly, press, and speech. Having those certain, in their words, unalienable rights is something that in lots of countries in this world you are not guaranteed. And you got to fight to keep those things. That may have been the case, and that may have been the rules in the beginning, but if you allow those rules to erode, they will. You have to hold them up. You have to prize them. You have to be strong about them, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of people who made a lot of sacrifices for us to live in a country this free and this beautiful. And I think you got to appreciate that. And that's where I wanted to end. A little bit of optimism in the current state, which I think is dying, which is needed, at least in my perspective. I think that's something that I like to think about sometimes. Some things that I like to share, because you know what? It may not be the best, but it could always get better. And if you want it to get better, there's a serious role that you have to play in that. But at the end of the day, got to do the best with what you got. I encourage you guys to read. I encourage you guys to ask questions. I encourage you guys to engage in your communities. Engage in your life. Have a great time. Enjoy yourself. Read a book. Have a meal. Have a nice one. Life's short. I appreciate you guys for watching. This is episode 8 of the Wise Lemon Podcast. Thank you. Like, share, subscribe, and I will be back next week. Adios.